Hello and welcome back to Analysis with me, Jonathan Steele. Well, in today's programme, we've been looking at the situation in Tunisia, 3 years to the day since Mohammed Bouazizi's self-immolation set off the regional and even the global protests that were called the Arab Spring. Starting with Tunisia's Ben Ali, Arab dictators fell from power, and there was general optimism that a democratic revolution might transform the region. 3 years on, there is much less of this optimism. While a devastating war now rages in Syria, Egypt is back in military hands, and across the region unemployment remains high. Living conditions in many ways are worse, and there appears little prospect of any improvement as the region remains gripped by political crisis. Has the so-called Arab Spring now become the winter of discontent? With me in the studio to discuss where the region is 3 years on is Oliver McTurnan from Forward Thinking, an NGO and mediation NGO that works with many of the Arab parties in Egypt and Tunisia. On Skype, we have Dr Noureldin Miladi, a Tunisian academic at Qatar University. On the phone, Mehrézia Labidi, Deputy Speaker of the Tunisia Legislative Assembly, sometimes dubbed the highest-ranking female political figure in the Arab world. And by phone, we have Anas Altikriti, President of the Cordoba Foundation, an independent research and public relations organization. Welcome to you all. Well, Oliver, let me bring you on to this whole wider issue of the Arab Spring. I mean, you've been in Egypt a great deal as well as in Tunisia. I mean, what's the main thing that's gone wrong? Because it did seem so optimistic at the beginning.
There was a natural optimism because there was a desperate need for change. It's gone wrong because for a number of things. I think we thought the ballot box was the answer and that this would resolve all the problems. But as I was saying in the first part of the programme, what the governments in each country inherited were institutions that were far from fit for purpose. You know, they weren't able to deliver on the expectations of the people. Then you have this enormous mistrust. I think one thing in common between all the countries is these dictatorships or regimes survived because they fed fear. And the fear that was fed to the secularists that if we don't hold power, you'll have these Islamists taking over and you will all be subjected to an Islamic way of life, to Sharia law in every aspect of your life. You won't be allowed to enjoy the secular things that we endorse at present. So there was that deep-seated mistrust, so there for several decades. Now, you can't expect those things to disappear overnight. And it would have taken a real genius, I think, and strategist to be able to, pull a country together, to be able to address all these aspects.
But Tunisia has done better. I mean, Tunisia hasn't had a coup, the military hasn't stepped in.
It's done better because I think Ennahda came to it with the right attitude. The fact that they were, from the very beginning, prepared to share power with a secular and with trade unions and so forth, trying to bring everyone in, was the right approach. I think what was a mistake with Ennahda, and things would have got better, if right at the beginning that said, we also have to work with the old guard. As I understand it, in Tunisia now, you have a situation where Ennahda, they say, would probably poll 30%, maybe a bit more. Nida Tunis, which is a sort of collection of the old guard, right and secular, would also probably poll about 30%. So it's obvious that neither party or neither group or coalition can really run the country unless there is some level of cooperation and work. Now, it's taken, I think, nearly 2 years, really, to realise that. And I do hope that they'll be able to work through this second interim period, and that we will then see the ballot box getting to work, but we'll still have to work on the institutions, bringing them up to purpose, and so that they can deliver on the expectations of the people in a fair and objective way.
Well, thank you. Let me bring Anas Altikriti into it. I mean, what is, in your view, the reason why the Arab Spring has not fulfilled the promises of 3 years ago?
Well, let me take another spin at this, and is that I think that one of the reasons why we're describing the Arab Spring in the way that we are is in a sense due to our impatience. The major radical revolutions that changed the course of history took months, often years, sometimes decades, such as in the case of the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and others that really changed the course of history in those particular regions and around the world. They took quite a lengthy amount of time in order to settle into a pattern and really, bring in the kind of change that the revolutionaries wanted. The Arab Spring, let's not forget, comes at the back, as Oliver McTurnan correctly described, as decades, almost a century, of a period of extreme bleakness, of extreme grimness, of stagnation on every single level, of failure, economically, politically, socially. Every single level was a failure. And therefore, to expect that within a matter of weeks, then the toppling of dictators in Tunisia and in Egypt and Libya would all of a sudden bring about a state of prosperity and justice and stability and the such, I think is taking our dreams and wishes way too far. I think that we have to give this time. What we are seeing is a revolution that is still into its very, very, very teething stages, its very early stages. I think that at this moment of time, if we were to compare the state of affairs throughout the Arab world, not only in the countries where the Arab Spring took grip, such as in Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya, but even further afield in countries which weren't directly affected by the Arab Spring, I think that we'd find that the level of the narrative and public discourse going on in the streets is something that was unimaginable only 2-3 years ago, and that is as a result of the transformations that hit the region.
Well, let me just bring Oliver in, because I know he has to leave before the end of the program. I mean, we've talked about the model of the Arab Spring, but there's also the model of the Egyptian coup. Has that not had an effect? Is that not one reason why Rashid Ghannouchi and Nada, who are Islamists, have now made more concessions to the opposition because they're afraid of being toppled altogether, possibly in the manner that it happened in Cairo?
Of course, there was always a threat that you would have an intervention, also a coup, a type of coup, different, maybe because the military wouldn't lead it, but maybe an intelligence-led coup or police-led coup in Tunisia. But I think the Ennahda party had much more maturity, if I can put it that way, in coming into government than the Freedom and Justice Party in Egypt. Because I think a lot of the Ennahda people had been in countries like Britain or whatever that seen democracy at work. They were aware of the challenges and that. The Tunisian or the Egyptians, I think, were far more certain that they could go it alone in the way they did, or the way consultation took place sometimes was actually informing people what they were going to do rather than asking what's the best thing. So I'd hope that it wasn't what happened in Egypt that has dictated what's happening now in Tunisia. I just hope that it is a real desire to get things right. And the story isn't over in Egypt. I think what has happened to the Brotherhood is appalling. It's appalling that the West again appears to have put its values and principles to one side, put its interests to the forefront again. Let's hope that they'll continue, but at least off the public scene, to keep pressing for a real reintroduction of democracy in Egypt. But I think at the moment that's fanciful thinking.
Well, thank you very much for taking part in the program, and thank you for those comments. Mehrézia Labidi is unfortunately not able to be with us for the rest of the program, but I'd like to come to you again, Noureldin Miladi. I mean, do you agree with this point, or not agree that the Cairo coup did have an effect on Ennahda in Tunisia and made them more willing to make concessions?
Well, to some extent, really. I mean, I would argue that Ennahda was winning from the beginning, in actual fact, to share power with the others. On a positive note, I think this is the strength of Ennahda party in a way. Although they had a majority ahead of all the other secular and non-secular parties after the elections of the 23rd of October, in 2011, but still they were very much willing to share power with two other secular political parties, in addition to extending their hands for cooperation with the people from the previous regime. In actual fact, Nahda appointed scores of expertise and staff in the, for example, in the media and other sectors in the economy and so forth from the previous regime. The head of the central bank, for instance, is one of the examples. I think I would like to kind of some of the points that Oliver mentioned. I think the challenges in a way to a transitional democracy are obviously many, especially in a country where it's been ruled by a dictatorship for the last 50 years. I mean, not least to mention is what is termed as the deep state, as the layer of bureaucracy that has been running or sustaining a dictatorship for the last many decades. I think this is one of the challenges, in my personal opinion, which was to some extent undermined by, I mean, the Troika, the ruling government in Tunisia now, especially in Nahda, and also in the case of Egypt, where those people, they are very much entrenched in a way. They are very much in power in all sectors of the state bureaucracy, in the government offices, in business and so forth. Those people, they really have a clear impact on how the country is being basically led and how the country is moving ahead. Now, the second probably factor, in my opinion, are obviously the external powers or the external forces, meaning foreign countries who, under the table, they are obviously supporting part of the opposition and not supporting another part, or supporting the counter-revolutionary forces. I mean,
you're talking about Tunisia,
instance,
particularly
during the last pardon?
You are talking about Tunisia, the counter-revolutionary forces and the foreign powers' influence. You're specifically talking about Tunisia, not the wider region.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, in Egypt, it's very obvious. Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
No, I was just clarifying when you talked about the counter-revolutionary forces and the role of the foreign powers and governments and so on, whether you were talking about Egypt particularly or Tunisia. You're saying you were mainly talking about Tunisia, is that right?
I am particularly talking about Tunisia, yes. I mean, yes. Where it's been proved, I mean, during the last at least year or so, that there has been lots of support from abroad to a specific secular political parties who are really against the Troika, against this government, and who've been causing all kinds of troubles in terms of the unlimited number of strikes and all kinds of problems they've been causing. So the external forces, it's very obvious that they are playing also another role. I think this third factor, in my personal opinion, is the extent to which the ruling Troika itself actually is not forward with regard to having a strong political will in terms of implementing its plans. Unfortunately, I see it most of the times reacting to issues from the other political groups and especially the opposition, rather than going ahead with its plans in terms of reforming the economy, reforming the media, for example, reforming all sectors of the social and political life in the country. I mean, I attended another program before with you on the channel. We spoke a lot about the media. This of the media is even getting worse in Tunisia. Unfortunately, this government has not really done much in terms of reforming the media sector in the country. Neither in terms of issuing, for example, new laws which govern and organize the media properly, and learn from experiences from the UK, Europe and US and so forth, or in terms of basically changing the media scene towards a
towards a positive life.
Well, can I just cut you off at that point? Can I just cut you off at that point to bring in Anas again, Altikriti? I mean, Anas, what do you see as the role of foreign powers now and external forces in this, what's happened to the Arab Spring? I mean, one of the whole points about the Arab Spring was to get rid of foreign influence. It was sort of anti-colonial as much as anything else, wasn't it? Now, the foreign powers, are they coming back in really in a decisive way?
Well, I think we have to look at this from a wider perspective, and that is that we don't live in isolation of each other. And I think that what the problem was that basically Western interests were being pursued to the exclusivity of the interests of the people in the Arab world. And I think that we're entering a new phase whereby we have parity. I don't think that there is a problem with nations and even governments or states pursuing their interests. But what I think we had a deep problem with over the past couple of centuries, to say the very least, and particularly over the past 30, 40 years in the Arab world, is the fact that there was no parity. There was an exclusivity in terms of pursuing Western interests, whilst the Arab people had leaders who basically were quite happy to lie down and to give free hand to Western corporations and Western interests. I think that things have changed now, and that is where the Arab Spring comes in. I believe that we describe the Arab Spring in wrong terms when we think that it's the mere toppling of dictators like Hosni Mubarak or Zainuddin Ben Ali or Gaddafi. I think it goes way, way beyond that. I think that these are merely blips on the radar of what has happened. What has happened is that a nation from Mauritania far west to Iraq far east, of more than 220 million people, all of a sudden, for the very first time in almost a century, have found that they have a voice and they have quite a considerable ceiling of aspiration, and that I believe that they have no problem in terms of interacting with the West based on parity of interest. That maybe we will come to a day whereby the Arab world and the Arab people will themselves pursue interests in the Western world. I don't think we are here about building walls. I don't think that that's the problem. However, I take your point, Jonathan, in that what we're seeing, particularly from Libya and then onto Syria, I think what we saw was what I would feel was sort of a diversion from what the Arab people wanted from the Arab Spring, and that is peaceful change, peaceful revolutions that then lead onto radical changes. Now, as lovely as that would have been had it happened, as lovely as what happened in Tunisia was, as lovely as what happened in Egypt was until the coup in July, but I think that what happened from Libya and Syria was the world waking up and seeing that all of a sudden everything that has been set in place over the past century was being dismantled by the free will in the people, and therefore certain Western powers wanted to get involved and get into the game simply because they didn't want to be a sideshow in the next phase of the history of the region. And therefore what I think is, and once again I say, and this I may slightly disagree with what Oliver said before he left, and that is that the show isn't over. The revolution isn't by any means over. In fact, I don't think that even the first phases of this revolution is over yet. And therefore, we will see the likes of the coup in Egypt. We will see setbacks. We will see interventions by foreign powers who want ill of the Arab Spring. I don't think that in itself will necessarily signal the death or the end of the Arab Spring. This is a process.
Well, isn't one of the ironies of the whole thing is that there is still this winner-takes-all mentality, so that elections which inherently are a good idea get corrupted because the winners, even if they win by a relatively narrow margin, think that entitles them to rule as though they represent the entire country. And so then they provoke new opposition instead of the kind of thing we've seen in Tunisia, which is consensus building, coalitions, compromise, willing to have governments of national unity.
Well, actually, I mean, to be perfectly honest and to be perfectly fair, I mean, we are let's not forget when we speak about Egypt and when we speak about the FJP and President Morsi, for instance, and how they ruled, we are sort of passing judgment on a victim here, on people who are now being totally annihilated, totally unfairly. Their legitimate win by the ballot boxes is totally being eradicated, and the will of the Egyptian people is therefore being totally sabotaged. So, we are at that phase. However, in order to humor this particular discussion, and the facts say that actually the FJP tried extremely hard. And actually, President Morsi went a little bit too far, some will say, in order to reach out to others. Let's not forget that the very first person whom he approached to become prime minister was Ayman Noor of the Noor party. And then he went to other people. He assigned vice presidents who were Copts, females and such, totally breaking many taboos within the political and social life of Egypt and breaking many of the perceptions.
I think we're in danger of running out of time. I just want to give a final word to Noureldin Miladi. I mean, do you feel generally optimistic now in spite of what's happened in the last year of the Arab Spring?
Oh, yes, certainly. I think, the hopes and aspirations of the Arab street or the Arab people in the region are still there in a way. And the promises of the Arab Spring obviously will take time to come to fruition. We don't expect a revolution that was built on decades of dictatorship will bring its fruits in 1 year or even 3 years. As my colleague mentioned before, Oliver and Anas, it's really a fact that this part of the world will take decades to probably come to a situation of peace and democratic coexistence and so forth. I think the case in Tunisia probably is obviously much more hopeful than Libya and obviously Egypt and Syria. The case in Tunisia is probably heading towards more stability and probably towards an elections which bring a new government in the near future. The situation in Egypt, I think, is the same. I think the world is witnessing the horror, the barbarism of the regime that is taking over for the moment. And I think the West, who've been silent, I think also is witnessing how a grave mistake it is to support a military coup on a legitimate government.
Well,
I think the future is bright, in my opinion, but it's going to take a lot of time.
It'll take a lot of time. The future is bright. Well, on that optimistic note, thank you very much indeed, Noureldin Miladi, and thank you, Anas Altikriti, and our other two speakers who've now had to go. And thank you for watching our program on the 3rd anniversary of the Arab Spring.